everybody. Welcome back to Legends Book Club. It's been a minute, but we are getting back into the Thrawn trilogy, talking about Dark Force Rising here, the second book by Timothy Zahn. This says a lot of the major plot points from this trilogy are revealed here, and we're going to dive into everything that happens in this book. Full spoilers, so if you've not read it, of course, make sure you've read it, come back, or at least know the story. This is a story that is over 30 years old now at this point. It's just crazy to think about. But yes, we're going to talk about all the details and full spoilers. Before we do so, make sure you're hitting that like button, you're subscribing to the channel, and of course, you're commenting below, letting us know your thoughts on this book, our review, and of course, what you think of some of the discussions we're going to be having. Let's move into the review itself. We always do our reviews for Legends Book Club in one of three parts. Starting with our first part here, we're going to talk about Zahn's writing and the overall plot that he has constructed throughout Dark Force Rising. Sanak, I'm going to pass the floor to you here first. What were your thoughts on the way Timothy Zahn wrote Dark Force Rising?
I would say I enjoyed a lot of his original content, especially a lot more of the Force related storyline stuff. I think he does weave a pretty interesting, if not necessarily as fast paced of a story as Heir to the Empire, but one that is very interconnected between all the storylines. I don't know. This one is a little bit more of a complicated read for me. I have always vocalized on this channel how much I really appreciate the middle parts of stories of trilogies. It's a story that I think is interesting in parts, but a little boring in some areas. I think especially when you look at like the Han and Lando storyline, that one kind of drags for me a little bit. I appreciated like the stuff that Leia was going through, because it feels like there is some massive setup there, and what is being introduced here with a new species, with their culture and all that. It's really Luke and Sabayoth. Like that is the crux of this whole story for me, and it's great. But anytime I had to like switch back to Han and Lando, it's like they're kind of uncovering things that other characters already kind of knew or already cutting to the chase for, especially now with the storylines being fractured a little bit more, with like Mara Jade separated from Talon Card, especially in this storyline. I liked a lot of her development. I like what they were doing with Talon, but with all these other storylines pieced together and how interesting they are, whenever we return to the ones that were a little slower, a little more boring, it felt like the book dragged just a little bit. Not that I don't enjoy Han and Lando, but I think they were a little like repeated almost from Heir to the Empire. It's just that the story, as rich as it can be, the best parts of it were maybe 30 to 40%. The others were just solid setup or a little boring.
Those are all fair points. I personally, I still love this book. I still love the way Zahn writes this story. I think he still has mastered the art of writing the original trilogy characters. Every mannerism, everything they say, everything they do is very much in line with their character and their character progression. I do agree that the Han and Lando storyline in particular, he uses those characters a lot throughout all of his work throughout the entirety of Legends to go on undercover missions or to search out facts or to do this or that, and they are often away from the group. I think as much as he seems to have a great time writing the dynamic between Han and Lando. I think he really enjoys the banter there that we don't get that much of, honestly, in the original trilogy. I think he likes to play off of that. It is the smaller of the plots and the least interesting because there is so much that goes on with Leia on Honegger, as well as with Luke on Jomark, and then Mara Jade, Talon Card continuing to push into that main set of Star Wars characters to show why they are so amazing and so fascinating. Also, all of you guys voted Talon Card out of the character bracket. I'm very disappointed by that. That's all right. That's all your opinion. Getting back into my review of this, there's a lot of really interesting ideas here that I always appreciated that were brought forth, especially on Joe Mark. And I think this is the book where, if Heir to the Empire is Zond saying, this is our return to the Star Wars universe. This one, you know what Thrawn is trying to do the whole book. He's trying to find the Dark Force to reveal at the end of the first book. And the whole time he's trying to find this Katana fleet. I think that bit of that mystery is gone, but it's shifted over to our heroes on how are they going to find this. All of that is not quite as intriguing when you do have lore dumps over with Luke on Jomark and with Leia on Honegger. And I think both of those things are extremely fascinating, especially when looking at them in a world for Sunik and I being born in the late 90s. We didn't live in a world really consciously without the prequel trilogy, so a good 50% of Star Wars is missing here. And looking at the old lore and seeing Zahn play around with things for the first time, not he doesn't do that as much in Heir to the Empire. He introduces things that are very Star Warsy and he pushes them in Star Warsy directions. Here, he takes things that he created and he tries things that are new with them, whether it's lore dumps from Sabaoth about the Jedi and seeing his perspective on the Jedi versus Luke's perspective, seeing the way the Jedi are seen by civilians. I also thought was a really interesting plot point. Sabaoth obviously is maniacal and insane, and so there's a bit of a an uneasiness about the way the people on Jomark see Jedi, but there's also a vast reverence for them that we don't have in the post prequel world of Star Wars that I think is really really interesting here. They're more like samurai. They're like badasses who wander the galaxy and people just worship them. They're like the main character of a western or a samurai versus in the prequels there's hundreds of them and everybody knows who they are and nobody really cares about them. Here there's a lot of like, okay, that's a Jedi, like we need to bow down and respect him. That to me was really interesting. Also the whole politics of like what Vader's doing at the time, how the 44 years on Honegger that Vader had saved them or been, saving them but wasn't really saving them, subjugating them, that doesn't fit into the timeline. So there's a lot of interesting things on in the way that Zahn develops the mythology of Dark Force Rising that I think pull those like imagination strands in my head and go, okay, well, this is how he was seeing it back in the 90s. I love the way history is preserved through Dark Force Rising in that way. But let's talk about the characters specifically here in this book. There aren't too many brand new characters of extreme importance that are introduced in Dark Force Rising. There's a lot of furthering of main characters. So we'll talk about our favorite characters who are recurring from the first novel, but there are a few that are much more broadly introduced, like Kabarak is given a much larger characterization in this novel, as well as all of the Noghri people on Honegger. And then, of course, we also have Senator Bel Iblis making his debut appearance, a character who is extremely important across a variety of legend stories, especially in the 90s, and then anything related to early rebellion and early New Republic storylines. So, Sanak, I'm going to pass it to you. Give me a couple of your standout characters and your favorite character arcs throughout this novel.
Yeah, I think a character that's totally new that I really enjoyed was Senator Carm Bell Iblis. I think that's how you say his name. Fascinating character because I think he's also quite representative of 90s Star Wars EU. He is Corellian and he has this pre-established connection with Han. Gives us a little tease about how a younger Han was like as well. And I mean, let's face it. In the 90s, you didn't really care too much about Anakin Skywalker so much as you cared about who was Han before, right? And he gave us that tease there, while also being his own distinctive Corellian, seeing like that Corellian pride in him to refuse to not go back to Mon Mothma and be part of the rebellion, even though he was one of the first three like to really push the proto rebellion out to really work together to get their groups functioning together. It's fascinating how much of a character he is without really saying much in this book. At least how Zahn has written him. Like he has some personal moments with his crew, like Senna and whatever, but he is for the most part just like his backstory is really appealing to me right now, and I can't wait to see what they really advance in the Last Command because that is the book I remember the least. I guess another character that I really did enjoy was the matriarch or the Noghri, at least the matriarch of the clan of the Noghri that we meet. She is a very interesting perspective for me because she does at least color how this society functions while she still manages to have this very strong personal connection with Leia. She also does reveal a lot about the lore of pre-Empire Clone Wars, even like Old Republic, just from like how she unveils how long Vader and Empire has actually been working here. And that's the one part of the story that, especially now, coming like Liam said, being born in the prequel era. This plot point of like, oh, the Nogri have been under control, been lied to, the debt that they supposedly had owed to Vader was all like manufactured. Like it's fairly easy to see that happening. It is the Empire. We always want to paint them as the villains no matter what. But how long they dragged it out, and then this twist of like, oh, this is not actually the Empire. This could have been happening something in the Republic timeline, right? I'm like, well, is it the Republic timeline or is it the Imperial timeline? Because I don't know how Zahn is really viewing how long this period of time was. You look at like a Sebastian Shaw, Alec Guinness, they all look fairly old, right? They're definitely older than a Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor, right? So that I can see where they are expecting almost the prequel era as we know it of 3 films and a TV show, and I guess Rebels too as like the connector for them, for Zahn, maybe it was like almost like a 6 film length of a story, like with a huge gap in between how she introduced that world, how she introduced a species that could be connected. Yeah, I thought that was fascinating. I'd say those are 2 of my standout characters. Obviously, I'm gonna give some love to Joris. He is the coolest character in this book besides Thrawn, and he gets a lot of run here. But I was also surprised how effective it was because I thought it was going to be like super long for his story, but it's actually quite condensed. Like he hits the ground running, and I didn't really expect him to be manipulating Luke right away, but he's using the Force to do so, which I thought was pretty interesting. Right? He doesn't really hide who he is by being so blunt, by being so almost insane. I guess he pushes Luke to be like, oh, he's just someone who's like ill. He's gone through so much turmoil and trauma that he uses that as a cover to then like work on Luke, quite physically make him heavy and doubting in his mind. Shorter than expected storyline for him, but one that was just as effective and, like you said, a huge entry point to how Zahn and Star Wars creators were thinking about Jedi. Definitely a character I expected a little bit more from, but what we got was really strong.
Yeah, I completely agree on that point. The Luke stuff in this book is my favorite of the original trilogy stuff that is brought back here for our main characters. I absolutely love Luke's battle of wits between him and Jurusema. Like the constant Luke here is still learning, and he's less far along than we see him in canon, especially at this time where he's kind of already discovered a lot about the early Jedi of the Republic, and he's learned a lot about them, but he's still investigating stuff. Here, he's like he doesn't really know. There's multiple times when he's talking with R2, and he's like, is this guy a Jedi Master? Is this what Jedi Masters are really like? I like that because there's a lot of different layers, and especially at the time, the reader is thinking the same thing. It's like, well, is this what they're like? At the time, too, we still have no use of the word Sith. So Vader and Palpatine, they're referred to as Dark Jedi, and there's a lot of blurring of the ideas of what a Jedi is. Is there a distinct difference between a dark Jedi and a light Jedi or just a regular Jedi? This book does a lot to further that, and I really enjoyed that. Obviously, the continuation of the Luke and Mara relationship here is very, very pleasant and something that I love tracking throughout all of Zahn's work. Talon Card, always a major standout. Love every scene that he's in this book as well. Garmbel Iblis, the Senator Garmbel Iblis, is one of the biggest characters in the early New Republic, all of early Rebellion, Dark Times timeline in Star Wars Legends. It's really cool to see all of that brought to the table here. Some of you might even recognize him in Force Unleashed. He's a major character. So, and of course, the Nogri. I'm just going to talk about the people in general. This might be the first time in Star Wars, outside of a handful of comics in the Marvel line, this might be the first time we really get a full deep dive on an alien race and what their people and culture are like compared with humans, and the way we get real world things brought into them, and how we start to see alien species developed in Star Wars. And I think it's really, really works well here. The Matrox is a cool character. Clan, learning about all the different clans, Clan Kimbar, all of these things work to build up this ecosystem, build up characters that at first are uneasy, are aligned with the Empire. Then you start to learn about their past with Darth Vader. Obviously, a move. Vader being involved with these people in general does not seem like the Vader you we know post prequel world, or even into canon. But here, what Obi-Wan's discussion of Vader when he calls Darth Vader a Jedi, in A New Hope, was there a time when Anakin Skywalker shifted from being known as Anakin Skywalker to Darth Vader, but was still a Jedi? There's a lot of ideas here that you can see some of the places that Zahn was going in his mind, and the 44 years thing means it, in the George Lucas timeline, it would have happened pre even the Clone Wars. Like it would have happened when Anakin was a Padawan. That's really fascinating, the different ideas here, and then also comparing and contrasting them with what came in the future. But I love Leia in this book as well. As much as like the Luke stuff stands out, maybe the character that stands out to most to me out of the OT characters is Leia. I love seeing the kind of the version of Leia that we stray away from a bit later in Legends, but here she is very much so both Jedi and politician. I love that she uses her power as both senator but Jedi to whip out her lightsaber to show them force powers and to be like, I am the Malar-Yush, the daughter of Darth Vader. They love that they call her Lady Vader. Like that's just all that stuff. I think is really really neat. It's great world building, great mythology. And then finally, I want to talk about the end, the Katana fleet. I think that's a really cool concept. One that I still wrap my brain around ways we can come and bring that back into canon. But the whole idea of this missing fleet, it also gives you a really cool look at the way they thought about the Clone Wars. Like Sanak mentioned, it could have been this like 20-year long thing. There's no real definite period that Obi-Wan gives, and we don't get really any information on it. There's very few source books or anything pre Thrawn trilogy. So seeing the mythology made here, all of that, and then the reveal of the clones at the very end, it's a really exciting finale. We'll talk more about the clones next book because that's kind of the main plot point of The Last Command. But here, I thought the Katana Fleet, the way it's used, the mystery of the Katana Fleet, and then also the way it's brought into the action scenes at the end, all work really, really well. Let's wrap up our review here, though. Final thoughts, Sonic, and score out of 5. What would you give Dark Force Rising?
I think this is a book that has, in parts, way more compelling and interesting characterizations, strong plot developments, and Zahn definitely makes his own stamps on Star Wars eras outside of the only Star Wars era there was at that point in time. It's interesting and it's really awesome to see this, like you said, Liam, as like a capsule of that 90s, early 90s, late 80s era thinking of Star Wars. Coming at this from, unfortunately, no matter how I look at it, a very prequel, George Lucas prequel skewed viewpoint, an era that we live in with the sequels, with these Disney Plus shows. I look at Dark Force Rising as, unfortunately, a lesser sequel to Heir to the Empire. And I'm only saying that because I always expect the second book in a trilogy, the sequels, they always end up being my favorites of the whole series. And this is the first time in a while that I can honestly say that the first book was better. I would give this, in summary, a 4. It's a light 4. I think it is a strong book. I can say I'm very excited for The Last Command.
I'm going to do the exact same thing and drop mine about a half point. And I'm going to drop this to a 4.5 out of 5. I love Dark Force Rising. I think it's still an incredible book. One that, for me, has a lot of the things I really dig about reading Star Wars, which is lore and world building. And this has it in spades. This is the one that both captures the original trilogy feel while also really trying to inject original content into it. And I think Zahn does a really good job. One of my personality traits on our show is I love being the like Star Wars historian. I love learning about the history of the franchise and the growth and the development of it. And Dark Force Rising has a lot of things that just like raise my eyebrows and perk my ears up and go, oh, that's really cool. That's a great like reference to something that is so different from how we are now. But I really like just seeing that perspective. So those are our thoughts on Dark Force Rising, our long-awaited review of Dark Force Rising for Legends Book Club. We'll try to be a bit more timely with The Last Command. We'll get it out to you sometime in June, but we do have a lot of High Republic stuff we're working on wrapping up. May, early June might be a High Republic heavy month when it comes to Star Wars books here on our channel, but don't worry, Last Command will be coming. We also have a review for Jedi Survivor coming out as well. Jedi Survivor live streams every Tuesday, Thursday. Make sure you check those out and tune in. We answer your questions live. Also, make sure you check out our tier list, which is coming out soon as well. We'll be talking about, in the theme of Legends, Legends has been a really popular thing on the channel here for a long time, but we will be talking about Legends characters that aren't in canon yet, that we want to see in canon and ranking some of the most popular ones from most wanted to least wanted to see. So make sure you're checking that out. Of course, character bracket is still going. We're in the first round, this time the first round being 64 characters. So they are coming out twice a day, 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern, and noon Pacific / 3 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you're checking those polls out, voting for your favorites so they can make them through to the next round. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.